Well, hello. We're here to do a watercolor. I'm using 4 colors, and this is a card swipe. I learned this technique by Scott Swinson, who is a wonderful artist that I took an online course from. So I've lined my card with paint, and you can see this is very random. I'm just dragging the paint across a dry page of watercolor paper, and I'm just gonna keep wiping until that card is clean of paint. So you can see there's really no planning per se. I don't at this point know what's up or down, whether there's no blue, so I'm assuming there's no water, but okay, so my card is clear. Now I'm gonna start adding water, because remember I said the page was dry. So I've got my Hake paintbrush, and it's a little bit tinted, you can see, with some Paynes gray. And that was just a little leftover in my brush, complete accident, but I don't care really, because Paynes gray is one of the colors that I had on that card. I used 4 colors, as I said, and I'll list those below. So I've added a lot of water here, probably way more than I needed, but I wanted to let it soak. I wanted to let it travel. You can see the paper really is just getting soaked right now. It's barely touched the paint. So you can't see any of the paint moving at this point. A little bit right there. There you go. So this process is about moving paint and letting water be the vehicle. Pigment is blending, colors are intermixing. It's completely random in that regard. I know it's going to be a landscape, but that's about all I know. So you can see a little of the orange on the left there peeking through. That is the burnt sienna. Burnt sienna. And look at that beautiful blue. So that's the first color I put on my card. So right now I'm just moving water, basically. And I'm making sure that the water is touching the paint. And I'm not paying attention much to how it's moving at this point, except you'll notice that I keep shifting my paper so that the pigment travels in different directions, and so I just keep it sort of mobile. And right now I'm just moving color, because that pigment right there and to the left and a little bit to the right there is so thick. It's like I have used oil color with a palette knife. Okay, so here you'll see I'm going to come back and start swirling water around. Oh, first I'm cleaning up. Okay, so I'm just cleaning up the edges there, so I'm completely in control of where I don't want the water to be. And the reason I want so much water on there is because I know there's a lot of pigment. It's just kind of trapped in that line along the horizon there. So I want to just try and keep that softened and moving. And at this point, though, I don't know if the painting will be upright or upside down. And you can see I'm at the bottom side of it here than now, but at some point I'm going to flip it and let the water and the pigment and the paper do its magic, do their magic. It's very cool. Look at that. It's very runny, very runny, very runny. And there's a couple of dry spots, right? You can see that the paint is going around those dry spots. So at some point I'm going to intervene, but look at that, isn't that cool? I wish it would stay like that, but it doesn't. I really like that a shadowy effect that looks like trees through the mist. So enjoy it while it lasts, because it's like watching clouds. Every few seconds it changes. Well, every second it's changing. The other colors I used are Paynes gray. So that's the darkest color. And I used, like I said, burnt sienna. I used permanent green, and then I also used Windsor green, which is a blue shade, and that's what's giving that teal. Okay, so a little bit of time has passed, and you can see there's been some blotches on the paper, so I'm going to mist at this point. Now you see the darker spots appearing. I've just misted. And I usually just use water, but what was right beside me was this tiny little mist bottle. Believe it or not, it's lens cleaner. So there's a little bit of cleansing agent in it, and it's also got an alcohol component to it. So you can see the effect that it's had so far, but wait, it has a really cool effect. So I'm going to hone in to those spots later, so just be mindful of what they're looking like right now, because it kind of just looks like, gravel. Yeah, but this will look quite different. And as I'm doing this voiceover, I'm looking at the dry version, but it's only been a couple of hours, so I haven't gone back in again. So if there's going to be a part 2, I will film that as well. And maybe do a better job at cropping, because this is not really showing much. But the water's still moving. You can see it's still very wet. And so, again, I flip it at some point, but I'm trying to get the water to move. And again, at this point, I don't really know which way is up. I think this is the right direction, but I have not made a decision at this point. And those really dark, globby things kind of back off the horizon there, no idea what they are. And that's okay. Because right now, as I'm looking at the dried version, they look quite like dwellings. And my daughter said that it looks like wood along a shoreline. So you tell me what you think it looks like. How's that? I'd love to hear. Okay, so there's quite a hard line right in the center where that white is. So I think I'm going to start doing something about that soon, because I don't want that to be a hard line there. And while things are still damp, that's when you can influence things. Okay, so a little bit of time has passed, and you can see the effect that it's had on the paper there. Okay, so I'm flipping it so that the pigment that I'm going to drag now, I want to make some trees. I've decided which way is up, and it's easier to pull trees than it is to paint trees. So there's the effect I wanted to show you. It's like a snowflakey effect that the alcohol spray had on that pigment and color. And the drier it gets, the darker the edging is around it, which is really cool. So I'm looking at the dry version right now, and I'm seeing so much more than what you can see there. So I'm using right now a rubber brush. I don't know what to call it. Let's see if it has it. Nope. It says Catalyst by Princeton, number 15. It's a rubber tipped thingy, and basically I'm just pulling very gently, pulling that paint. And when I'm not pulling the paint, I'm just very gently scoring the paper. And you'll see as I continue doing it, and I'll zoom in at some point, that when you score the paper, it just allows the pigment to flow and land, and in a really natural way that looks like brush and trees and twigs. And so that's what I'm doing here. I'm just scoring very gently, and the wet paper, pigment, whatever, is being pulled into the little places that I'm scoring. I'm just learning this, so I'm certainly not an expert at it, but it's really a cool technique, and I'm liking it. So here I'm just touching, in order to add texture, really, because it's, like I said, that line at the horizon is so thick. It's thick with paint. Again, I'm just pulling paint from that center, and I'm also gently putting little score lines, which end up kind of fading more into the background, but they look distant. It visually puts them at more of a distance. And I've got it flipped upside down just because it's easier. I find my brain doesn't spend any time thinking about where branches should be, because in nature it's so random that you can overwork a painting using your brain. And I like it when I just let the painting create itself in some ways. Okay, so here I've zoomed in a little bit. You can see I'm just barely touching the paper, but it's just making little marks that eventually add up, and you'll see that in the end. So I've changed to a fan brush now, and again trying to move the mound of pigment that's across the center of the horizon there. There's a lot of pigment just lined there, like I said, as if I used oil paint and a palette knife. So I'm just touching. Paper is still very wet. Just touching, moving paint from the center, touching, trying to be subtle, not trying to influence it too much, but just trying to help it a little bit. And look into the center, up and down both. You can see that as it dries, the snowflaking is happening in the clouds too. So I'm trying to create like a vegetation effect here, and I was hoping that I could pull some of the burnt sienna, but that didn't happen. It was just all dark that kept getting pulled into my brush. So I'm just kind of doing what I can not to overwork it, but touching very gently, just and you can see on the edges I have tape. You can't see the tape, but it's clear. So eventually I'll pull that tape off, and it will have a straight edge all the way around. All right, almost done with that. Because again, I don't want to overdo it, right? So you can see I'm like just trying my best not to be too overbearing with it. But lot of dark pigment on my brush, so I wanted to use it. Okay, so I'm going back in with this optical spray, and I want to protect some parts of the painting. So you'll see I'm using an onion paper, which I eventually will rip in half and use both sides. So I aim there to spray, but I don't spray yet because I didn't want any up there, and I realized that in time, thankfully. So you see I've just protected that whole area, given it a couple of spritzes. And this does a couple of things. Like I said, there's an alcohol in there, and in general, it's going to soften any of the hardened edges. It will soften things, but because of the alcohol in there, it also creates like a blooming effect, which ends up looking like snowflakes. And then there's a couple of circles which look really cool, and I'll zoom in there in the end. But anyway, this is my process, and I hope you've enjoyed watching. There we go. I was hoping these circles would end up staying, but they did not.
They're setting up for a kids' party next.
So we are basically dry. You can see I haven't touched it since I last videoed. I hadn't mentioned the salt, but you can see it there. I haven't wiped it off yet. Look at the effects. I think I'm going to go back in and do a little more work in a couple of places. But isn't that cool? It just creates its own magic. These look like dwellings to me, outbuildings, and this looks like a barn, an outcropping of trees, and that looks like a farmhouse. But in the shadows, something else here, maybe, don't know. You can hear my puppy in the background. Looks like there's fireworks going on in the clouds, but I was thinking I was going to turn this into a tree, but I kind of am just going to let that sit for a bit. Anyway, see you next time. Thanks for watching.